Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the initiation of labor and the hormones involved in that process. There's a lot that we don't understand about how these hormones talk to each other and how they know that they're supposed to be there at certain times. But we know what hormones are there, and we know kind of the process of the purpose of these hormones, what they do in the process of labor. So, the end of normal gestation is about 38 to 40 weeks. That's the end of prenatal development. And you can see towards the end of that third trimester, the infant, the fetus at this point, is quite scrunched in there. There's not a lot of room in the uterus as that fetus gets bigger and bigger. And at the end of the third trimester, the placenta is no longer able to provide all of the nutritional needs. The fetus is so large that it needs more than what the placenta can give. So at this point, the baby needs to find a way out so that he can find more nutrition. And so what happens in normal development is when the fetus is not getting adequate nutrition, the placenta will release a hormone called corticotropin releasing hormone. Now, that hormone signals the fetus's adrenal glands to spike a high production of cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. And so these two hormones together, these stress hormones, are involved in maturing the organs of the fetus. Now, at the end of the third trimester, most of the organs are pretty mature. The last organ to develop and become functional and fully mature is the lungs. That's kind of an important organ because pretty soon this fetus in the post-uterine environment is going to need to use its lungs for the first time to exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide. So the lungs are the last thing to develop, and this surge of stress hormones help them to develop. Now, if a baby's coming early, one of the first things the doctors will do, they'll do a blood test on mom, and they'll look for trace levels of a substance called surfactant. Surfactant tells us if the lungs are fully developed. It's a soapy substance that coats the lungs and helps it make use of oxygen, basically. It helps the lungs make use of oxygen. So if surfactant is there, doctors feel okay, this baby can survive outside of the uterus, you can go ahead and deliver. If surfactant isn't there, doctors will do whatever they can to keep that baby in utero, delay labor as long as possible, to give those lungs a chance to develop. That corticotropin releasing hormone has been linked to an increase in maternal nurturing behavior in both humans and animals. We don't really know why, but stress hormones in general increase our awareness of our surroundings. And so this spike of corticotropin releasing hormone at the end of pregnancy may increase a mom's awareness, make her more aware of her baby's signals once he's born. And so that increases nurturing behavior overall. It's also possibly linked to nesting behavior, that period of nesting at the end of pregnancy where moms report feeling a burst of motivation. Typically, there's lots of preparing for the baby, organizing, getting the house ready, clean. That's nesting behavior. That might be linked to this corticotropin releasing hormone. As the baby gets bigger, as the fetus gets bigger, the uterus expands, it stretches. And at a certain point of stretching, we think that's what signals the release of a huge surge of oxytocin. Oxytocin has been released by mom throughout pregnancy. It's a hormone produced by the pituitary gland, mom's pituitary gland. So throughout pregnancy, mom's been producing this, but as the uterus stretches, she produces oxytocin, and the baby also produces oxytocin. And this surge of oxytocin together, it's about 500% more oxytocin than has been there at any other point during prenatal development. that surge of oxytocin causes the uterus to start contracting. Now, at this point, it's not heavy contractions, just light contractions. It's pushing that baby toward the cervix. As oxytocin spikes, progesterone, that's been pretty high throughout pregnancy, progesterone remains high during prenatal development. Progesterone drops. And what happens when progesterone drops is the uterine contractions become even more intense. Now that's because that's one of the main purposes of progesterone is to keep the uterus from contracting. This is true even before a woman's pregnant in her monthly cycle. Progesterone stays at a pretty steady level throughout the month, and when it drops, that's when her uterus starts contracting to shed the endometrium, the uterine lining. That same process is happening during labor. Progesterone's remained high, keeps the uterus from contracting, keeps that baby in there. When oxytocin rises, then progesterone drops, and suddenly there's nothing holding off uterine contractions. And that uterus begins contracting quite heavily, the type of contractions that are necessary in order to shed that baby from the uterus. And then the last set of hormones that are involved in the labor process are a group of hormones called prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are thought to be responsible for dilating the cervix and effacing the cervix. And we'll talk about specifically what that means when we talk about the stages of labor. Relaxin is a hormone that starts to be released throughout pregnancy, at the beginning of pregnancy, and what it does is it kind of loosens mom up. It loosens up her muscles and her joints. Her joints aren't quite as tight as they were before she was pregnant. What that does, it allows that baby to grow inside the mom's uterus. It stretches those pelvic bones a little bit, the joints of the pelvic bones. And so relaxin is important. It's released in higher levels towards the end of pregnancy, and it also helps with even loosen up mom a little bit more so that her pelvis can be flexible enough to actually allow that baby through her vaginal canal. So kind of interesting process, a lot of things at work, and this is a little bit of a simplified view, but some interesting things that happen in order to initiate labor.